All right, well, we've started with macroeconomics and talked about economic systems, and then we went down into micro a little bit. Let's jump back up to macroeconomics. In macroeconomics, we talked about economic systems like communism and capitalism. And under capitalism, we talked about the importance of having consumers, you and I, get to vote with our dollars for the things we want or the things we don't want. Well, to be able to vote, we have to have a choice. Under communism, you have no choice. You get what you get. But in capitalism, we want to be able to pick and choose and buy the things we want and don't buy those things we don't want. That means we have to have competition. Now, there's many types of competition. We'll go through them here. One of them is perfect competition. This is where you have lots of suppliers, lots of buyers, and the product is all pretty much the same. When we get to marketing, I'll argue that any product can be differentiated. So standard product should probably be in quotes. We can always find ways to differentiate our product. And that's important. If you can't differentiate your product, the only way really to compete is price. And that's a horrible business to be in. All right, well, that's perfect competition. Monopolistic competition is kind of a strange word to say monopolistic, because it doesn't mean what we tend to think. It means that products are differentiated. Here's where I was talking about earlier. You want to be able to differentiate your products because your product is different than someone else's. You can charge more. So in a monopolistic competition, we still have a lot of providers, a lot of buyers, but the products are differentiated. They look different. Very, very important concept in business, differentiation. What other types of competition do we have? Well, we can have an oligopoly. An oligopoly is where there's a few providers, only a few, but maybe many consumers. Good example of that is the airplane industry. There aren't a lot of people that make airplanes, but there are a fair number of airlines that buy airplanes. So in that case, there's an oligopoly. And you've probably heard the term monopoly. Monopoly is where you have one provider, one supplier, and lots of consumers. We have that case. The post office is a monopoly. Only business that provides letter carrier to the homes. It's a natural monopoly. It's a natural monopoly because how many people would want to deliver something from some remote town in Montana to some remote city in Arkansas? Well, the post office. You create one. Used to be the telephone company was a natural monopoly. Why? Because how many people are going to run a telephone line to every single home in the country? Well, all that's changed now with cell phones, so it's not there. Legal monopolies, those are the ones that the government has allowed or created. We talked about Amtrak and the post office. SiriusXM is an example. Government allowed SiriusXM to be the only satellite radio provider. So those are monopolies. Let's take a look at the economy. When we talk macroeconomics, we like to talk about how the economy as a whole is doing. Well, how do we know how they're doing? How do we know how the U.S. economy is doing? Well, we can talk about, well, I heard on the radio this, or my father or my brother's out of work, or they just got new jobs or got a raise. Well, that's all good, but we want to look at the whole economy. And to know that, and not just to have anecdotal evidence, we have to measure it. There's going to be a common theme in business, is we need to measure things. And GDP is how we measure the economy. Gross domestic product. And when you see curves like this, it's talking about the change in GDP. Our GDP is something like $20 trillion. And as the economy grows, in other words, as GDP goes up, we have what we call growth. Prosperity is when things are going well. Right? And then sometimes the economy has to contract. It actually gets smaller. People buy less. Why? Well, you can't continue to grow indefinitely. How many places can you put a Starbucks? Once you put a Starbucks in everybody's garage, there's no more places left. So people start contracting. People say, okay, well, I got to close these Starbucks, and I got too many of these, so I have to contract. And when that happens, we go into a recession. When businesses start to sell less. We could have a recession because of a pandemic. There's another reason to have a recession. A recession has a technical definition. A recession is defined as something that is where there is 2 quarters of negative GDP. The GDP declines 2 quarters in a row. We call that a recession. But the economy goes up, the economy goes down. At some point, people say, okay, I'm now the right size. I can start to grow. I can start to hire. People get jobs, and we come back. And we call this the business cycle. It's called a business cycle because it repeats itself. It happens throughout history. Things go well, and then things have to contract a little, and then things get better again. And the slope over time, though, is in a trajectory like this. The economies grow over time, even though it has an up and down factor to it. All right, so recession. GDP has to be negative for 2 quarters, 6 months or longer. Has to be real GDP. By real GDP, we mean doesn't count inflation, subtracting out inflation. Hey, if we had inflation and prices just went up, of course GDP would go up. Of course GDP would go up just because of inflation. But we want to subtract that out. So real is an important number. We'll come back to that again. Whenever you hear people talk about GDP, it's always talking about real GDP.